Hello, and welcome to the Girlfriend God Podcast, a podcast in search of and in service to the divine feminine, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional, spiritual experience. If you enjoy the Girlfriend God, please share it, rate it, or leave a review. Let's get in the flow. So today I'm really happy to welcome Dr. Rima Bonario to the show. She's a dreamweaver, soul coach, and wild heart healer with over 30 years on the path of conscious evolution. She's a respected thought leader, speaker, and teacher for women seeking to stand in their personal power while remaining open-hearted and connected. Her coaching workshops, online courses, and sacred travel journeys use the transcendent power of myth and archetype, ritual and ceremony, and soul shadow work to help her students cut through their energetic clutter. Rima is also the founder of Bloom Fine Egyptian Oils and the Sisterhood of Anointing Priestesses, where she teaches the lost temple art of anointing to reclaim feminine power. She's also the co-founder of the Art of Quantum Living, which trains and certifies people in the 21-day shadow work practice called the Quantum Living Process. And finally, she is the author of The Seven Queendoms, a soul map for embodying sacred feminine sovereignty, which you can purchase on Amazon or wherever else you buy your books, or you can purchase them directly from her website. And you can find Rima online at rimabonario.com and with the hashtag Rima Bonario on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Have I forgotten anything?
You've done a remarkable job. That was fabulous. Thank you.
And as always, I like to take a minute to really thank guests, because since I started this podcast without fail, every single complete stranger I have reached out to and said, so I have this podcast and I don't know where it's going. It's all about divine feminine energy and God and the goddess and rather goddesses and deities. And do you want to come on the show? And people are like, yeah, sure. Sign me up for that. So I do have a few kind of leading questions and then we'll see where it goes. So the first question that I have, Rima, is I get that self-sovereignty essentially means, self-governing, self-sufficient, autonomy, independence, and all of those things. But how do you help your students? Like, there's an expression I love, which is you can't get there from there, right? Like you can't go from point A to point B and skip everything that's in between. So when women come to you or when they pick up this book and they are in a place of a lack of self-knowledge or in a place of hopelessness, how do you get them from there to there?
Yeah, such a really great opening question. The first thing that we need to look at when we're talking about sovereignty is the way we are within our own body, within our own sphere of influence. So very often people think the work starts with, how am I going to get everybody else to behave right and respect my sovereignty? And so their focus is really on the external world.
Right.
And spiritual principles tell us that the external world, in some ways, not in every way, but in some ways, is a reflection of our internal world. And what's really true, if you really want to break it down, is not that the external world is the reflection of the internal world, but that our perception of the external world is based on our internal world. So
Right.
What we're seeing out there, whether that's beauty and joy and love and grace, or dysfunction and terror and trauma and, disempowerment,
Right.
a lot of that comes from what we are feeling inside. So the path to get there from here, when women come to me and they're really in a place of not feeling sovereign, not feeling that they have the capacity to make their own discernment in terms of the path that's in front of them, or even with simple things on a day-to-day basis, they have to start the work of seeing, okay, how have I put myself in this box? How have I allowed this experience to unfold? Where is my point of power in all of this? Where am I a participant in my current life experience? And that's shocking and difficult for people sometimes because you know, if it's been very, very traumatic, we are rightly feeling in our what's sometimes described as victim energy because we've been a victim.
Right.
And unfortunately, we've been in many ways trained to feel comfortable in that victim space. We may not like it, but on some level, it's familiar and comfortable. So the work of shifting out of that and beginning to find the places where our personal power exists is hard work in the beginning, and it's challenging work, and it's rewarding work because that's how we get out of the conundrum.
Right. I know that, when I work with women or women come to me for spiritual advice and they have, let's say, a traumatic experience in their distant past, like childhood trauma, even childhood sexual trauma. Yes, you were a victim in that you had no power in that situation. But when they want to know themselves, I say, okay, yes, I see you and I acknowledge that you have this trauma in your past. But your part now is to look at how am I dragging around that label of victim in my adult life? And if it's somebody I could be brutally honest with, go, to say, and how are you using that as an excuse for your own behavior?
Yeah. So I like to help people differentiate between what happened to us and how we identify ourselves.
Right.
So we were victimized if we're in a
Yeah.
situation like that. However, we don't have to say, I am a victim.
Right.
And it's a refinement there because we have to be honest about our past in order to heal. We have to feel and move through, and hopefully we have a good guide by our side when we're unpacking some of the worst things that happened. And there are some really, really terrible things that happened that never should have happened. And when we get into that place of feeling like, okay, I have some power to be the leader of my own life, the queen of my own queendom, to
Right.
choose for myself, how am I going to use this for better, even if it's only to make sure tell my story so that somebody else gets helped and it doesn't happen to them.
Right. I know that. So many years ago, I volunteered for a rape crisis services call line and victim advocate, and I was also a volunteer at a domestic violence shelter because both organizations were run by the same umbrella organization. And I know from my own training that that's why they started encouraging women to not say, I'm an abuse victim, but I'm an abuse survivor, because that is a much more powerful word.
Yeah.
It's a warrior-like word, and words are powerful.
They
Words
are.
are
They
powerful.
absolutely are. And so it's interesting that we're coming into the conversation about power and open-heartedness through this doorway, because this is the balancing act I feel like we're in right now at this time in history, where we don't want to continue to mimic power patterns that keep creating traumatic experiences for
Right.
people.
Right.
We want to find ways to lean into our power with a softness and an open-heartedness that's the hallmark of the divine feminine, that allows us to stand absolutely in the core of our being and absolutely in the truth of our being from a place that doesn't cause greater harm to ourselves and greater harm to others. And that's this work that we're in. And so even as we're helping women make that transition from this very difficult place of feeling completely empowered and having been, consciously trained sometimes by narcissists and abusers into that space, to take that journey and begin moving into feeling their own power again. And it doesn't happen by shaming them. It doesn't happen by telling them to get over it. It happens by having a very loving and nurturing place that continues to remind them of their deepest truth, which is incorruptible.
Right.
That no matter what anybody has said and done to you, your deepest essence, your deepest truth is incorruptible and purely of the divine. And when we can start to reconnect or connect maybe for the first time consciously to that aspect of who we are, we start to see, oh, okay, that's who I am. So if that's who I am, why am I tolerating this? And why am I tolerating that? And why am I allowing myself to be in this trajectory when really what I want to be is over here? And how can I get help to shift the behaviors and the habits of attention, the habits of behaviors, so that I can start creating something new in my life?
Right. I was thinking about, while you were speaking, I was thinking about, I listen to a lot of, I'm a big Marianne Williamson fan. And, when she talks about, my essential self cannot be harmed. You are not sick, your body is sick. Right. And, but that's a really hard place to get to.
Yeah, when we're triggered, when we've had emotional flooding and our body is in a state of fear, our animal body responds in a way that pops our neocortex offline, the thinking,
Right.
self-reflective part of us that makes us human, that makes us able to differentiate what Marianne's talking about there, that my essential nature can never be harmed, my body can be harmed, my life experience can be full of sorrow and suffering. But when we're not here, that's very difficult to hold. When the body is in terror and feeling that a moment of danger, true danger, is present, we're really just concerned with surviving that danger. We're really not concerned with these sort of metaphysical
Right.
perspectives. And so the problem for us as modern humans is that our alert system is overly sensitive because our biology hasn't caught up with the level of evolution that we have. So fundamentally, for the most part, as human beings, we're largely safe now, especially those of us that live in countries that are developed. And it's not perfect by any stretch. We have lots of unsafety in lots of places, but the kinds of unsafety we have are generally lesser than they were in the years when we had to live out in the woods and what have you, in the
Right.
jungles. So we get a lot of alerts, danger, 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 that push that response, that fear response, into the body very quickly over things that are more psychological. Not that that's not also important, but
Right.
it's not the physical instant moment of I'm about to fall over a cliff. And the body is still having that same response. And so it's in those moments that we feel fused with the danger. We feel fused with the fear. And we can't, there's not space in that moment to be able to say, oh yeah, wait a minute, but my essential self isn't being bothered here.
Right.
It,
Right.
it's like really, really hard. So we start to develop tools that help us to differentiate between a moment of discomfort that's offering us an opportunity for healing and growth, and a moment of true danger and oppression and abuse where we need to get away and out of that immediately. And so this work that I do provides, I generally tend to work with people who are not in that level of crisis,
Right.
because that level of crisis requires a different kind of intervention and support.
Absolutely.
And I tend to work with women who are more in the existential forms of crisis, that were just in the questioning, that were in the place of I don't know what's meaningful anymore. They're in transition in their lives between who they used to be and who they want to be, or they're finally just tired of not being able to get the traction they want in their life, to have harmonious relationships, to have healthy physical experiences in their body, to have healthy working relationships. And that's really about becoming masters of using discomfort for healing. And that's a really, really juicy place to play when you're ready to get there.
Yes. Um, in the beginning, you mentioned something that I have referred to as, I've often said there's a distorted comfort in familiar pain, right? And that's how we get trapped in those roles. I mean, it's just old messaging, right? That's all it is.
Yeah.
And most of us, I mean, I can't speak for people in other parts of the world, but I know here in the United States, most of us have so much conditioning from the time we were born. It's really, really hard to break away from that messaging, but it really is a sense of reprogramming that when you do this kind of work, even though it's metaphysical work, which I believe shadow work is metaphysical work, right? And shadow work is hard. That's why a lot of people don't want to do it.
Right. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, "Oh, let me see if I can, dive into my deeply uncomfortable places and figure out how I can stretch a little bit." I mean,
Right,
usually what happens is something occurs. Somebody says
right,
something or does something. We have a disappointment. We have an unmet expectation. We have an
right,
unmet unconscious need. And then all of our shadow material gets triggered. And then when we have enough wreckage in our life because our shadow's been out there, playing
right.
its unconscious game, that's when we decide, okay, I better figure this out because I'm going to end up alone and unhappy and bitter, and I don't want that.
Right,
I don't
right.
want that.
So do you see, I mean, you come in contact with a lot of people and a lot of different people from a lot of different places. On the podcast lately, in the first season, we very often talked about that we sense this shift, right? Like women in their collective unconsciousness, let's say, are waking up to these things and saying, no more, right? And we could even take situations like, I don't want to bring politics into the show necessarily, but like let's talk about the pussy hat for a moment. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
the events that led to that were traumatic events for a lot of women,
Yeah.
but the power that came out of that was remarkable.
This is so important what you're saying here because there's a line from Shakespeare where he says, I'm going to paraphrase because I won't get it quite right, but nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And there's there are edges to that aren't exactly, I don't necessarily agree with at the far extreme. There is behavior that we can absolutely say, no, that behavior is off, but it's us deciding that behavior is off. I think about, there's a better example. It's a parable that goes like this. A man, um, his son returned. He'd been gone a long time, and the people of the village, celebrated. And he said, "Well, we'll see if this is good news." And then the next day, he went out and found a wild horse. And the son brought the wild horse back, and the people of the village cheered and said, "This is good news." And the man said, "We'll see." And the next day, the son got on the horse and fell off and broke his leg. And the village said, "Oh, this is terrible news." And the man said, "Oh, well, we'll see." And the next day, the army came in and was scripting all the young men to go off to war, but his son couldn't go because his leg was broken. And the village said, "This is good news." And the man said, "We'll see." And the moral of the story is we can't actually know
Right.
always in the moment how some experience that is occurring that feels difficult could ultimately serve us. And that is the place where I believe sovereignty comes into play. In my life as a sovereign being, I choose to make it up that I get to have everything in my life serving my own unfolding. That doesn't mean it's all hearts and flowers. There's some really crappy stuff
Yeah.
that happens. And I can choose, after I've given myself time to really feel my feelings, to grieve, to be in my sadness and to be in my anger. This is not a bypassing scenario. I can choose to use it for my own growth, grist for the mill. But there's when things get shorthanded, like suck it up, or it's all God, it's all good. That's the sort of metaphysical version of suck it up. We're we're missing the point, which is that we're humans and we are allowed, and it's important for us to have the experience, to feel the feelings, to be in the hurt and the pain so that it can be moved out. We don't want to pitch a tent there. And we don't want to avoid it because then it just builds and builds and builds. And eventually somebody accidentally steps on that tender spot. And now you're giving them all your unresolved pain that you've never given yourself a chance to deal with. And that's a misuse of the way that we're supposed to be in relationship with each other.
Right. Which kind of leads into the next question that just came to mind, which is, so in self-sovereignty for women, is part of what you teach women how to have relationships with other women? Because we can be as
Absolutely.
self-sovereign
Yeah.
as we want, but I think that that as human beings, we are hardwired for relationships and connection and communication and intimacy with others.
Yeah, I mean, if we lived alone as a hermit in a cave, we wouldn't need any conversations about how to hold your own sovereignty because there
Right,
would be no challenge, right?
right, right,
And for women in particular, we have to work on healing our relationship with the feminine, right? So,
right.
I mean, some of us had great moms, yay. Some of us had non-existent moms. Some of us had really terrible moms, and our our relationship to the feminine as a principle is colored by the experience we had with the first female person we interacted with. Now,
Right.
we all have masculine and feminine energy in us. So our fathers can have a lot of feminine energy. Our mothers can have a lot of masculine energy. Or it could be that our mothers hold all the feminine energy and our fathers held all the masculine energy. Regardless, we have grown up in a patriarchal society.
Right.
So we're all affected by the less than respectful approach to feminine principles and feminine qualities and feminine values. So we all have some work to do to reconnect to this more feminine way of being. And the best way I know how to do that is in circle work with other women with a skilled facilitator that helps to create a safe space inside that circle for us to explore what it means to actually be held in a nourishing, nurturing, loving environment that also values truth and accountability from a place of connection to our essential self. And this is how we get into that healing work is we take the risk of becoming vulnerable in a setting like that. And we have the opportunity then to presence our wounds and have a different outcome this time. So maybe when we were younger, we went to somebody for love and care and support, and they didn't validate our experience. They didn't offer us understanding. They didn't offer us care and kindness. They dismissed it, ignored it, or told us to suck it up, So we get to have a different experience now where there's that place for us to be held. Yes, that's hard. I see that's hard. You make sense about that's difficult. And to witness the other in their vulnerability. And then I also layer onto that tools that help us to not get stuck there. Okay, so now that we've expressed that, we're not denying that, we're in reality around that. What else do we want to create now going forward?
Right. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So in your I'll go back to my questions for just a minute because it's something I wanted to make sure that we talked about. Where I haven't read your book. I will, but the to read list is very, very long these days. um, I know that in your book you talk about archetypes, right? The seven queendoms are based on archetypal work. So when did you first learn about, I assume that you know about, or that some of your work is informed by Jungian archetypes, and when did you learn about that, and how does that inform your work? And then I'll go back to the sisterhood thing because there's something else I want to say about that.
Absolutely, yes. So I have a doctorate in transformational psychology, and part of my training was to look, of course, at Jungian principles. And so I've done a lot of study and research in understanding the foundations of modern psychology and the recognition. I mean, Freud's was the very first person to sort of recognize that, hey, some of what's going on for people might be in the way that they're thinking and inside their own, sort of mind, and how that's affecting their view of the world, their view of themselves. And behavior can sometimes be traced back to this way of thinking. And then Jung helped us see that there's a whole inner life going on. There's this whole inner life going on. And then there's even unconscious inner life going on and subconscious inner life going on. And the beauty of archetypes is that they help us in a very short form way identify patterns of thought, behavior, feeling, so that we can use them to shift our inner experience. So if I say for you, to a group of people in a workshop, take up a physical position that mimics the warrior archetype, you're going to get very clear forms. Everybody knows what that is. They know how it feels. They know. And then if I say, take a position that mimics the great mother archetype, same thing. They know what that looks like, what that feels like. So when I talk to women about inhabiting their queendom and taking on the archetype of the queen, we immediately get a sense of, oh, there's something regal here. There's something noble here. There's something empowered here. There's something related to service here. There's something related to adornment here and power, right? And all of those things begin to give us a felt sense of what we're moving towards. And that's one of the reasons that I feel that the archetypal work is truly powerful, because it gives us a doorway into something we haven't yet found for ourselves.
Right. You don't happen to know Jean Shinoda Boland, do you? Because I'm a big fan. And she writes about
I've
art.
heard that name, but I'm not familiar with her work.
She's a Jungian analyst. And the first book of hers that I read was called Crossing to Avalon, which is very much about her own spiritual journey. And she kind of came in the spotlight when she wrote a book called Goddess and Every Woman. But she has a follow-up book to that I'm reading now called Goddess and Older Women.
I'll have to check those out.
Yeah. Like I said, I was just curious because that's very much the same lens that she uses, are these Jungian archetypes. So one of the things I wanted to say about sisterhood, and then I have another question. Recently, I recorded another episode with Dr. Carla Ionescu and Minette Chilson, and we were talking about how that messaging is starting to break down, right? That women are in competition with each other. And we looked at that through the lens of the very first thing that Minette said was, she's very knowledgeable in goddess culture and goddess history. And she talked about the name of the podcast episode is going to be Healing the Sisterhood Wound with Eve and Lilith. And we've talked about Eve in other episodes, and we've talked about Lilith in other episodes, but what she said was, we really threw Eve under the bus. And I thought, oh, like I never thought about it that way, So this sense of competition among women, and that one woman has to suffer so that another woman can achieve, that is a big myth to break. both for ourselves and let alone other women. I mean, do women come to you with that mindset that they must step on other women in order to achieve what they want?
Well, of course, because the patriarchy has told us that that is the way. That,
Right,
patriarchy at its core operates under the illusion of lack, and it
right,
operates under the belief that kill or be killed, and the sword is the primary tool. Now, there are absolutely times when we must use our sword, right? And this over positivity, the toxic positivity that sort of says, oh, no, there's never any time where you should, like, oh, it's all, you can smooth it all out. That's an extreme lens that's causing, challenges on that end of the spectrum.
right,
However, on the other end of the spectrum that says everything needs to be handled with a sword, we are living in the downside of that right now on this planet. You cannot kill your way out of a pandemic. You cannot kill your way out of climate change. And so feminine principles that value networking and cooperative, collaborative solutions is the way forward. It is imperative. And as a people, this is coming. This time is coming. If you follow sort of the great year cycles and astrological understandings of the 24,000 year precession of the equinox, we're moving into a time of Aquarius, which is about cooperation. But interestingly, on the opposite side of the zodiac is Leo, which is sovereignty and individualistic in its approach. And so the partnering of sovereignty and community is really the secret sauce going forward. And that is the feminine, that's the queen, that's the feminine principle. And so, okay, I went a little bit around that now, but
that's okay.
coming back to the piece around oh gosh, can you remind me of the original moment there? I really want to get back to it. You
I think
asked
you
about,
said, the mindset of one woman must
yes,
fail
yes,
for
yes,
another
yes.
woman to
Okay.
succeed.
Yeah, so this lack that we're responding to that says, well, there's only a certain number of quality men, so we have to fight for the quality men, this sort of
Unless you're
biological
lesbian,
drive. Yeah,
like me, we
okay,
don't fight for the
right,
men.
right, right. Thank you. Thank you for quality partners. Yes. And so um
There's even fewer of us to choose from.
well, it's, and so there's that, right? And then there's the women who were entering the workforce, and there were only going to be a certain number of women that were going to get to be allowed into the East, C suites. And so who's,
Right,
is which one of us are they going to choose? This lack mentality forces us into the paradigm of competition as the only answer. And
right,
it's not the only answer. That is a patriarchal perspective that competition is the only answer. There are wonderful moments where we want competition as a way of sparring excellence and creating excellence. We need that. We must also have cooperation. We must also have deep connection. We must also have networking solutions where we work together to find common ground. And they actually are polarities. They're not opposites. We need them to work together, where
right.
sometimes we're striving for individual excellence, and then we bring that individual excellence into the community. And then sometimes we're preferencing the community, and we ask that community information to go into the side of individual excellence. And we do it like a dance. And this is the kind of thinking, flexible thinking, that we need to save ourselves going forward into the future. We need it in our relationships. We need it with ourselves. We need it in our workplaces. We need it in the global community. And so this sister wound that says, I have to be your adversary, keeps us stuck in that old patriarchal model. And
Right.
this new way that's coming forward, which I really think is one of the benefits, as you've said, of watching some of the most outrageous patriarchal aspects on display particularly since 2016. It's been amped up and part of our daily diet. That we've been able to say, okay, wait a minute, we have to come together here and draw some lines.
Right.
Right. And we've reunited again. We've had another wave of feminine sisterhood that's come through
Yeah.
that said, not only do we need to come together, we need to come together across multiple lines. It's not just going to be, the white soccer moms, who are running the show. We need to bring together our sisters of color, our LGBTQ sisters and brothers. We need to have a kind of a community that allows us to talk about these things in a way that supports the upliftment of all.
Right. Interesting you should say that, because I just made a post. I believe I posted it to Instagram yesterday, and it was essentially a call for bringing some diversity to this podcast, because even though, yes, I see this spiritual shift and I see it on a global level, and I kind of keep my pulse on, how the spiritual winds are blowing. But I had to, post this. I mean, it was an authentic post saying that, it's a failing on my part, but I've only been doing this a little while, although I've been on my path a long time. I mean, the podcast, of course, puts me in touch with all kinds of people and access to all kinds of events. But my personal sisterhood network is severely lacking women of color. And I've seen the women of color camp complain about that, right? Like all these big spiritual shifts, including my own, goddess worship and a return to a matrilineal society. If you do a Google search for any of those things, the first 10 results you're going to get are white women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So why is that? And how do
Well,
we change that?
yeah, that's really a beautiful question. And I, for my own work, every November, I do what's called Queen's Council, and I invite colleagues to come and teach. And I make an effort to have at least a couple of women of color to be part of that program. I'd like it to be more diverse like you as well. And, it's in there, diversity can be there in terms of race. It can also be there in terms of sexuality. It can be there in terms of lived experience, age, all of that. Right. And one thing that I've become very humble about is that I cannot ever, ever really understand what it's like to be a woman of color. Right. I cannot ever, ever really understand what it's like to be a lesbian. I mean, that just wasn't my life experience. So I don't know that fear that might have been there of, the very essence of how I see myself is rejected by the world, or that the very essence of how I present myself, like something I can't even hide, is rejected. So there's all these things that I'm acutely aware of that I cannot speak to with any authority at all. So even when I'm teaching, predominantly the people that come to me are women like me in my life experience, and I can help them in a clear way because we have similar ways of similar issues, right? And it's not that you have to silo. I'm not suggesting we silo each other. I'm just saying that when we are reaching out to bring other perspectives in, that's where it comes to our opportunity to listen and to be educated and to learn and to develop as much empathy as we can and the ability to root out within ourselves the parts of ourselves that are blind to our own biases. So I gave the example earlier about this example of women fighting over men, and you're like, well, yes, or women, yes. So that's a bias of mine. I'm generally going to start with that particular example when talking about mating, and these are things that are an essential part of owning our our responsibility as healthy beings, which is a part of what I think sovereignty is all about. And the thing that I really want to say about sovereignty that kind of encapsulates the last two bits we've been talking about here is that when we're in our sovereignty, truly in our sovereignty is not threatened by somebody else's sovereignty.
Right.
I thought we don't need someone to be put down around us when we're not in our ego, when we're really in our sovereign essential self. We don't need to lord it over people. And whether that's people who are different than us or people who are the same as us, people we're in relationship with. And so we are perfectly fine with sitting and listening to others who have a different perspective,
Right.
and being educated. And we're also willing, when we're sovereign, we're willing to look at the unconscious bits that we don't even know are in there yet in order to become more fully the best person we can be. That's really what shadow work is inviting us into.
Yes. And I think, not only uncovering those parts, but embracing them, right? Because we do all have a shadow side, but without it, we're only half a person. You know what I mean? I've got to gather all the parts and make peace with them all.
Yeah, welcome them
which,
home.
which is really, that is really difficult work to do. So I think that many of us, many of the people that I know, and probably the people that you know, in terms of working with women of color, that we really had a huge wake-up call as a result of the events of the past couple of years, right? And our awareness of them, because what's interesting to me and watch it affect the spiritual communities that I'm kind of, have a foot in. And I don't know how it happened, but like we learn to educate ourselves about our own history, right? It's why we talk about history on this show a lot, because if you don't know your own history, how do you know that what you're practicing is authentic? We talk about authenticity a lot. And I had complaints about that in the witchcraft community about like, well, how do you know that's the crystal that goes with that goddess? Like, did you do some research or did someone just tell you that in a Google search? You know what I mean? Like, where is your source information? But anyway, the work of knowing our own internal biases, I think, is crucial for a complete picture of that shadow work.
Yeah.
Right.
And what you're speaking about there is um it's a really, again, another one of these polarities, these tensions between tradition, which has history connected to it and long roots, and that's been passed down from generation to generation. We want to respect tradition and lineage. And then Gnosticism, or inner knowing and intuitive experience that comes from the present moment, right? Like,
Right.
yes, I know that my great grandmother and my grandmother and my mother all taught me to do it like this, and that's a lineage that I respect. However, in my evolution and my communion with the goddess and through my own meditation, I've been shown there's this new way I want to operate, or this way I want to evolve this tradition. And so we, as someone who works in the spiritual world, for me, this has been an essential part of my own journey to before I started my doctoral studies, I used to think the most important thing was just my own feeling nature and writing about my feelings and my truth and saying all my stuff. And you can't challenge that because it's my truth, blah, blah. And that, in some ways, that felt really good because I grew up in a family where I didn't get to do that.
Right.
And I had to completely ignore what felt like my own reality and agree with the reality that was being imposed upon me by the structures inside of my family. And that was damaging. So that was a healing experience for me to say, this is my truth, this is what I am. Then I get into my doctoral studies and I've got a thesis, that you're wanting to put forward, and you're being trained in a way of thinking in a way of arguing, in a way of proving, in a way of presenting, where you're expected to go out and see what the best thinking and research and scientific knowledge is on your topic. What have the giants that have come before you discovered about this issue that you're concerned about or interested in? And then you get to apply your internal thinking to the research and create something new. That's really how science leads us forward. And so I began to have a whole new respect for what real research is, and for what it means to go look at scholarly articles and peer-reviewed articles and information that has actual evidence to it. And so it makes me laugh now when I hear people talk about, oh yeah, I did do your research, and that means, you know, a couple of Google clicks. You know, no, actually not.
Right,
And so that's just confirming your own biases. So when we come down to things like that we're using in our spiritual world, whether that's crystals or whether that's essential oils or whether that's you know, even the things we choose to eat or our shadow work philosophies, we want to be sure as teachers and people on leaders on the path that we are blending these two gifted spaces of a sort of Gnostic arising wisdom from the inner self with this rich tradition and historical referencing and research. I mean, it's an essential way for us to not get too far off the path. If we only do history, we'll be stuck. And if we only do intuitive, you know, arising information, we're going to repeat damaging things.
Right. That's why, and so in the description of this podcast, it says, you know, bringing you an equal mix of academic research and emotional spiritual experience, because both are necessary, or at least have been necessary for me to grow. I have a couple other questions, but before I get to those, I want to ask, and I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase this question. So in your process with the people, both in your own work, right, in your own life, and with the people that you work with, is there a component of a divine being that resides both? I talk about my relationship with Goddess a lot, but one of the things that I say is I believe that she is something outside of me, but she's also something within me. And to have, and in terms of what we're talking about, I believe that in order to have a relationship with her, I have to have a relationship with myself. And in order to have my relationship with myself, I have to have a relationship with her, right? It's a feedback loop. It's a partnership. It's a co-creation. It's all of
I
this.
love it.
So how does that fall into your spiritual view?
Well, this is exactly my perspective as well. This is exactly what I teach. And so what you're talking about here is understanding the divine that is both immanent within us and transcendent beyond us.
Right.
And so when you've had the opportunity to experience yourself as both immanent, incarnated, and transcendent, there's something bigger than what we can see here. There's some part of us that is bigger than the physicality, that is even bigger than our emotional content and our psychology. I call it my soul. That's what I happen to think of it as. And I think of my soul as this intermediary between myself and the divine.
Yes.
You know, the people that look, the truth of the matter is nobody knows what the heck we're doing here. Nobody really gets it. I mean, we tell ourselves we do. We make up things because we need to in order to just like not go nuts over it. And the moments when we have that like deep fundamental awareness that wow, nobody really knows what's going on here, are edgy moments where we can flip into psychosis, you know, and have a psychic break. So we need to make up stuff to like make it through whatever this is. It's important though to know we're making it up. So if there's a moment where the thing that's made up that you've been following stops working for you, great, let it go, move on, find something else
Right.
that will fit better for you where you are in today's moment.
Right.
And you don't have to let go of all of it. You can take the parts you like that still serve you and move on to the next place. And so this recognition that I really cannot, my little pea brain cannot grasp the divine in any real way. But I believe there's some part of myself, some older part of myself, some part of myself that gets to
Yes.
actually show up life after life after life. That's not dependent on this particular version of itself as
Right.
Rima, that does grasp that. And I can have a relationship with my soul and use that relationship to help guide me in partnership, like you said. So my personality gets to have a say, and
Right.
my soul gets to have a say, and my life has gotten exponentially better since I started partnering with my soul self. And really, the way I make it up now is that I'm here to serve the goddess and whatever it is she desires. So, my
Right.
programs are her programs. My work is her work. And I try to stay as unattached as possible because she could pop up with an instruction to say, okay, you were doing that for a while, but now it's this.
Right.
Okay, so here we go, and having the courage to do that, to live in that guided way. And also to give myself time to say, okay, I hear that, and I'm gonna sit with that for a little bit.
Right.
And I'm gonna, really discern, is that for me? Because sometimes I pick up stuff that's for other people.
Right. Right.
So again, it's this sort of both and approach of, yeah, we're going to follow guidance, but we're going to take some time to actually check and make sure that guidance is fundamentally sound.
Right. Because like if I'm not spiritually fit and I hear that voice in my head, I can assume that it's the voice of my goddess to justify all sorts of unbecoming behavior. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we've seen that. And the truth
Right,
of the
right,
matter is, we're interpreting through our conditioned self. We
right,
have to remember that we are always interpreting everything that happens, whether it's something the goddess says or something our sister says, through our conditioned self. So that helps us stay humble when we remember that we don't want to jump immediately. Sometimes we have that deep inner intrinsic knowing, and it's very, very clear. Hooray for those moments. For me, it comes, and I really have to sit with it for a little bit to really
right,
get to that place of, okay, this feels solid.
right. I often say that sometimes the most spiritual thing you could do is nothing,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I have this. In fact, it's usually,
Ask for help, look to the heavens and ask for help
yeah,
and do nothing
I have to, I don't know. Here it
until it
is.
becomes clear.
I have this little thing that's usually sitting on the desk behind me. I've had this since my early healing journey
Mhm.
from the Tao Te Ching. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving until the right action arises by itself? And that was such a lifesaver for me because in the early days, one of my conditioned strategies for survival was to just figure it out and do it. Like just be in action all the time, just be trying to fix it, fix it, fix it, fix it, and smooth it, smooth it. Like I could not tolerate discomfort at any level. So I was a people pleaser to the nth degree. And this um, quote, along with my time in 12-step work, helped me discover the ability and the capacity to sit with discomfort, to sit with not knowing, and to allow the right path to arise rather
Right.
than to force it through action.
Right. That's why. So the one of my favorite prayers is the Serenity Prayer, and that's why. Right. I used to always, before I was so committed to being well spiritually, I used to interpret that prayer as force acceptance upon me, and then I will feel serene. Right. But
Well, yeah, I
you
mean,
can't get there from there, right? I have
right.
I cannot hear, because even somebody that does this kind of work and has been doing it a long time, I still have a lot of chatter up there on some days, right? And if I am not in communion with my soul, I feel that. And I know when it happens. And it's never because of something that's happening outside of me, ever, ever. It is all me all the time. So when I'm out in the world and I see myself behaving in unbecoming ways, right? Even if I'm not doing it outwardly, when I go out in the world and I'm in the grocery store and the voice in my head is saying things like, girl, I don't know who you let you leave the house like that, but you know what I mean? When I'm
Yeah.
judging a lot, when I'm judging a
Yeah.
lot, like I have my own little red flags that tell me, okay, you need to sit because something is going on with you. And as you talked about earlier, the trick is learning how to identify those things. So this is what I'm upset about, or this is what I'm worried about, and not pack my bags and move in there, right? Like I've identified it, right? That's what therapists teach you how to do, right? Just observe it. Learn how to develop your own compassionate observer,
Mhm, mhm.
right? I see this. That's what they teach you in meditation, right? The thought is like a train car and you're just watching it go by. That's interesting. Next. That's interesting. Next. That's a little disturbing and I might want to look at that later. Next. You know what I mean? It's gotta, yeah, but it is. It's really hard work to do. But I'm glad that that connection to the divine and being of service to the goddess, I consider that. I mean, this podcast was very much a calling. This was, I'm sure that you've had this experience. When I have an idea that I know to the core of my being did not come from me, right? It clearly came from a channel outside of myself. Even if it's also inside, I know it's not me. I know it's not my ego mind that said, I'm going to create this podcast in service to the divine feminine and talk about goddesses and reach out to people all over the world. And it wasn't like that. It was because I think I was struggling with there is nothing that she will not do to show me that she loves me. What could I do to really demonstrate how much I love her?
That's beautiful.
And this was the answer. This podcast was the answer.
Sometimes I call those dreams of the divine, or soul assignments, right? And we've been entrusted with those dreams and we've been given soul assignments. And we can choose to say yes to those or not. We can choose to play at that level or not. What I've found is that reciprocal relationship you're talking about there, when I'm really committed to being in alignment with my soul and trusting those dreams of the divine, the resources that I need show up for that.
Right.
And this is a key component of inhabiting our queen energy. The queen only functions as well as she does because she's eminently well resourced and she is
Right.
capable of receiving. She recognizes, like, the idea that the questioning of her worthiness to receive doesn't even enter the picture for her.
Right.
Of course, I must receive because this is how I take care of the realm. And
Right.
so being willing to say yes to these kinds of callings require us to take those steps in trust and trusting that what we need will be provided and the path will be made clear.
Yes, and I have, and I'm sure you do as well, experience that has borne that out over and over and over and over again. Um, yeah, it's remarkable. It's remarkable how that happens, but it takes a while to get there. There's a very big difference between belief in and reliance upon, right? And I had a friend who used to say, I want to trust, I want to trust my God as unfailingly as I trust the brakes in my car. Like when I roll up to a stop sign, I don't think, when should I press the brakes? Should I press them now? Are the brakes going to work? Is the other guy's brake? You know what I mean? Like I just do it. And that's how I want that trust in the goddess to be. I have a couple other questions if you have time. It's about 11:57 here.
Yep.
Okay, good. And then at the end of the show, I'm going to ask you three questions that I asked all the guests on this show. If you've listened to an episode, you already know what they are. So let's talk about your book a little bit. If you had to describe your book in one sentence, what would it be?
Well, the subtitle is It's a Soul Map for Embodying Sacred Feminine Sovereignty. So
Yes.
that's what I would say. Really, it's part memoir because when I started to write the book, I was really just going to focus on the how-to part, just the seven queens and being in relationship with those. And I very quickly realized I had to tell stories to give examples. And
Yeah.
then I realized, oh crap, I'm going to have to tell my whole story. And so the first part of the book is really about the journey that I went on and the first spiritual awakening I had and the work that went into making that a real day-to-day experience for me rather than just some ecstatic state that I had once upon a time. And
Right.
through that comes the discussion of shadow work and the reclamation of the feminine, and the divine feminine, and then understanding energy and energy bodies, because that's a key piece of this work as well. So really, it's a journey that women go on, and it's got a lot of elements to it that are interactive. There's a lot of beautiful artwork in it. It's a full color book. There's poetry. It's an experience that women can go on to have this journey to find and reclaim these parts of ourselves that haven't been, for most of us, that haven't been celebrated.
And I like what you said about when we bring to this work an air of authenticity, people want to work with us more, right? I don't want to work with people who are coming at me from a place of superiority.
Well,
I,
we have to know
I
that they've walked the walk.
exactly. Like when somebody tells me they're a priestess, I'm like, a priestess of what? Like, how did you get that title? Did someone bestow it on you? Did you go through a particular training? You know what I mean? Like, tell me about that. What is your
Yeah.
experience that enables you to? Because I feel like the word priestess has been tossed about a lot lately, as part of that spiritual shift, right? And any spiritual shift, it's separating the wheat from the chaff, right?
Well, here's the
It's
thing about
separating.
even the example about the breaks. Like we have to keep our discernment in place because it's rare, but it could fail, right? Or
Right,
there's ice on the road and they don't work as we expect them to. And so when we're in this arising, opening, just incredible renaissance that's happening now
yeah,
of Gnostic spirituality and inner life awakening, and a rejection in many ways of external institutionalized religion and things of that sort, where we're wanting to have a more personal, mystical relationship with the divine. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What
right,
is the lineage? What are the traditions? Even Gnosticism has a tradition, and what
right.
are the tools that we use to help us discern between the conditioned response or the ego's, oh yeah, I can wear the title and put the pretty beads on and all the things and burn the whatever, and am I holding actually the clear energy of that priestess channel and what the priestess archetype actually means, and am I staying humble in my awareness that I'm still learning on the path. I'm fond of saying, every teacher needs a teacher and every coach needs a coach. I mean, we should
Right.
being in that place of continued unfolding, not because we feel we're broken and we need to be fixed by someone, but because we need sometimes external support in making sure that we're staying awake to our own conditioning and our own blind spots and biases.
Right. And there's an aspect of humility, I think, that's necessary. And humility is a concept that's often either overlooked entirely, or misunderstood. right? A
Well,
lot of
we have
people,
to reclaim these words, we have to
right?
reclaim words like humility and impurity and words that were used to create shame
Yeah.
and bring them back into recognition that no, this is how we're holding ourselves accountable. This is how we're keeping ourselves safe. This is how we are being in discernment and creating clarity.
So one of the things, or probably the last thing that I wanted to make sure I asked you about is if you could tell me a little bit about your essential oils, but particularly about the sisterhood of anointing priestesses. And you refer to the lost temple art of anointing. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I don't know very much about that.
Yeah, so that is a beautiful thing that arrived in my life that I just out of the blue. I just did not expect it at all. I went to Egypt on my first sacred pilgrimage. And this was one of those callings, of feeling like my soul is calling me there. And I had the most amazing experiences. One day I'll write those stories.
Mhm.
And one of the things that happened during my first trip there was I met an amazing man named Gamal Abdul, who is a fifth generation alchemist and a Reiki master and a Sufi master whose family goes back into the lineage of the wise men and the magi. And he and his family have been working with these oils for 5 generations. And he introduced me to oils that align with the chakra system and then a few others. And I was enthralled. And so I was buying my first set and trying to decide if I was going to get the small or the medium set because they're not inexpensive. And he looked at me and he said, "You need to purchase the largest set you can because you will be sharing these oils with lots of people." And I just said, okay.
Okay.
And so I bought the medium set and went home and didn't think about it again. And at the time, I was in the process of launching the pilot program of what is my main work now, the Queen's Court, this annual program where it was called Self Sovereignty 101 back then. And it was really all about this recognition of these parts of ourselves that we need to step into to be sovereign, and they align loosely with the chakras. So flash forward several months and the program has started and I realized, oh, I need to share these oils with the women. And from that, it grew into something, just everything Gamal had seen in that moment that he looked at me. And I thought, oh, wow, he saw it. I didn't know. I had no clue. And
Right.
what I watched happen, what I knew was going to happen, because I began working with the oils myself in a very disciplined way, was that this is a technology that works in the energy body in a sort of homeopathic process. So these oils help us balance out our energy body by working in the chakra system. And each of these areas of sovereignty that I write about in the book are aligned with a chakra. So mental sovereignty is aligned with the third eye, for example. Spiritual sovereignty is aligned with the crown. Emotional sovereignty is in the heart chakra. And it gave me a way to support, another layer of support for the women that I work with and for myself, first and foremost, to create harmony and balance inside my own body. So my energy teacher, Linda Cesara, says that when we get triggered, what's happening is there's too much energy in our body for us to handle. And so it has to come out and go somewhere, or it shuts down and goes inward. If for people who do that under pressure, they will collapse and go inward or shrink. Others explode outward. And so some people just leave their body. I mean, there's all these different strategies we do to deal with having too much energy in the system. We can learn to create more grounding, more spaciousness in our system so we don't get to that tipping point
Right.
as often. And these essential oils are a critical part of my medicine box, my medicine bag, to help myself and my students develop more capacity to be in life in a place of greater ease. So the Sisterhood of Anointing Priestesses is really just a Facebook group, collection of us women who are not just using the oils because these are a great tool, but because something has awakened in us as a remembrance or a memory of this as something we used to do in ancient times, right?
Right.
Like there's some kind of connection to some ancient history there that is remembrance, and we are remembering who we are at the deepest level. And I feel like that's part of what the goddess is doing right now, is she's helping us to connect to these ancient lineages and these
Yes.
ancient tools and teachings so that we can bring them more onto the planet now. We absolutely this is the time they are needed. And I've watched remarkable things happen for people when they begin using these technologies in, on their own or in communion with other types of tools like shadow work and sisterhood circles.
Yes, and I do believe that inherent knowledge, it's like we've been sleeper cells for some of this stuff, right? Like this is inherent knowledge that we've always had, and it does go back to ancient culture. That's why we talk on the show a lot about ancient history as opposed to recent, more modern history. Um, and there was this really great example that Carla gave in one of her podcast episodes. She was talking about how, and I suppose this is a geographical thing, right? I don't think that everyone had this experience, but when I was young and when she was young, it was a very big thing, and it was a very big deal to become blood brothers or blood sisters with somebody, right? And for the people listening to the show that are younger, right, you would cut the palm of your hand with a knife, and the other person would do the same, and then you would either hold hands or shake hands or whatever. And then in our teenage worldview, we were bound together for life. We were blood brothers and blood sisters. Now, the interesting thing about, and I don't know if teenagers still do that today or not, but the interesting thing about that is no one told us to do that, but something inside of us knew the importance of blood ritual, which is a very, very ancient practice, right? Probably even more ancient than we know. And this, wanting to create altars and ritual space and all of those things. No, like nobody told me those things. I wasn't taught any of these things. I mean, I have since learned more about these things and how to, do them on a practical level and in an earthly realm. But that knowledge didn't come from me, and it didn't come from anybody that taught me anything about my spiritual life, right? Including that, because I was one of those teenagers that I wanted so badly to be a blood sister with somebody, right? I learned years later that really I had a crush on that girl, but you know what I mean? But just the desire to say,
Yeah.
hey, let's cut ourselves and mix our blood. Our
Yeah.
parents didn't teach us that.
I'm telling you, I totally this thing you're describing. There are so many of us that when we get in a circle for the first time or we meet, I remember one time I was manning a table in the basement of a church. I went to New Thought Church and I was starting a class, and this woman walked in and something happened, and we just looked at each other, and I watched her kind of slowly making her way over, and she came over and she said, I don't know who you are, what you're doing, but whatever it is, I need to be part of it. And I mean, we have these moments where we get reunited with energies and people. Those energies are contained in people, that help us to remember who we are. And it's so thrilling and exciting when you have those moments. And it's like somehow, I have to watch myself. You're talking about getting a little judgy earlier, where I start to feel like, oh, everybody else is just a muggle, because they don't have these experiences of like feeling that magic, that can happen when you get around people like that are kindred spirits and that are on the same soul journey. Literally, there's nothing more fun. And, my poor daughter, just as an aside, she's just started college. She's turning 19. And we've cursed her with this level of experience, right? Because now she's like, oh my God, they just want to talk about TikTok and this and that. She's like, where are the serious people?
Right, right.
She thought her whole life it would happen in college, and it is. It's a beautiful thing when we find those soul connections and we get to be in those relationships, and those relationships, they can last a long time or they can last a short time, but they're speaking to something, as you've said, that's intrinsic, that we know in our souls. And I do think that there are people that are here in this lifetime and they're just on they're on a rest lifetime, and then there are those of us, maybe the vast majority are here on a rest lifetime, and there are those of us that are here on a soul mission lifetime. And I don't begrudge people that are here on a rest lifetime. You go for it. I'm sure I'm going to get one soon. And right now for me, this lifetime is really essential that I show up and I do my work and I become available to help others on the path.
Yes. Sometimes I meet people, and so I'm also a past life regression hypnotist, and I'm trained in 2 different modalities in that. And again, doing that kind of work, I see evidence that shore up these beliefs that I have, over and over and over again. But occasionally, I will meet someone, and my first thought, speaking of judging, my first thought is, oh, it's your first time here, isn't it?
You're a baby soul. I'm an
Yeah.
older soul. Yeah,
But,
that's
but,
that's a
but I do see that in past life work, right? Like one of the things that I have people do, because I've kind of developed my own script over time, is I always ask them if they can find somebody, if they're in a place where there are other people, because there aren't always other people in their past life experience. But if they are in a place with other people, to look at people in the eye and to kind of mentally make note of people that look familiar to them. And inevitably, when they come back, they are able to identify who that person was in this life because they looked into their eyes and they recognized their own soul, right? Their soul connection with people. We've turned this idea of twin flames and soulmates into this very romantic thing, but I don't believe it's like that at all. I think we have a lot of soulmates. Maybe we only have only one other twin flame. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know really the distinction between those two things, but it is the only thing that explains why some people, we feel so deeply a connection to people we have just met, and other people come and go and we barely bat an eye. I mean, how else could you explain that other than you have some sort of history? Right? You have some sort of history with that person, or you have a soul contract with that person. I'm a big believer in that too. They're not always a good idea, but and past lives are another place that we look to explain very modern day circumstances. Right?
Absolutely.
It's why people do that kind of work to like cure phobias, right? People who are afraid of water, they go back and find out they died in a flood. Well, no wonder you have this inherent fear of water, even though you didn't have an experience in this life that would cause that. It's very interesting. Soul work of all kinds and all shapes and all forms is very, very interesting to me. And if people doing that work can find the goddess along their path, that's even better.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful and yummy place to play. I think the women that get attracted to the circles that I run very much at home in this conversation, although some of them are new to it. And it's really exciting when you get to really feel that sense of community coming online, that sense of
Yes.
somebody remembering, becoming a member once again of the culture, the circle, or the temple. I talk a lot about feeling like my histories around times when we would be in temple together, and to have the experience of being in temple once more, and that in today's modern times, I feel like the work, there's so much inner work that we're choosing to do, or that's the place where I'm playing, so that when we get ready to do the outer work, and really you can't escape the outer work because you're in relationship with people all the time,
Right.
but you're improving your mastery in how you're going to do that outer work by improving the mastery of how you are doing the inner work.
Right.
So we get to play in those places now. And
Okay.
anointing is just one of those sort of really fun tools that can help. It not only does it actually impact our current day experience, but it can help with the actual remembrance. Like people,
Yes.
I import these oils now from Egypt and sell them on my website, and they're ceremonial oils, very, very high vibrational oils. They haven't, unlike other oils, they're very thick. They have not been cut so down and watered down or blended with other kinds of alcohol or things like that. So they can stimulate some of that remembrance process.
Right. Right. So I'm going to wrap things up here. But at the end of the show, I ask every guest the same three questions. Before I do that, is there anything else that you didn't get to say or talk about that you want to say or talk about?
No, it's been a real delightful conversation. I've enjoyed
Yes,
it.
it has. It really has. And this is going to be a brilliant season premiere. I'm very excited. So tell me a fun fact about yourself that people who know you would be surprised to learn.
I jumped out of a plane twice in one day.
That is, yes, that is surprising. Do you want to tell the story of that?
Yeah, so I when I got released from my starter marriage, um,
Uh-huh.
I I was seeking to feel my power again. I was in a very difficult relationship that mimicked my parents' relationship, and I just was
Right.
in a very low place and needed to feel my own power. And so I was leaning into things that scared me, and so I had this idea of I want to skydive. I used to have this experience where I would close my eyes and something would happen and I would feel myself falling, and if I just went with it, I could literally just keep falling and falling and falling and falling and here and the wind going by. I thought, oh, must be how it feels to skydive. So after getting divorced, some months later, I booked myself a skydiving thing with a group, but the weather was bad. We didn't get to jump. So the next week I went back, same thing. I didn't get to jump. On the third week, I finally got to jump. By this time I was so prepared and so ready. It was the first jump of the day. And it was so amazing that I'd paid, a month ago. So I was like, well, can I go again? And so I just hung out there all day with all these kind of wild, crazy people and booked myself on the last jump of the day and jumped the second time. And it was incredibly liberating to feel like these were ways that I was feeling my core again, feeling my power again, that I could make these choices and own my power.
Well, and what an extreme example of just trust, right? Just
Well, that was the moment when the door opens and you're 13,000 feet up in the air and the wind is rolling by. And I was strapped to the front of this guy. And I think everything in my body is going, don't do it. And I just said, if I just close my eyes, he's going to throw us out of the plane. I'm just going to surrender here. And out
well,
we went. And boy, I tell you, it was something else.
okay. Tell me your current favorite TV series or movie, even if it's a guilty pleasure.
Mm. Oh gosh. Well, so can I say too, we just found Manifest. I don't know if you've ever seen that on Netflix.
You
It's a
know,
very,
yes, and you were one of many people who has recommended that, but my wife and I tried to watch it when it first came out, and the acting was so bad, I just couldn't get past it.
well, it gets a little better. I mean, yeah, it's not top notch, but the concepts are so interesting because
Yes.
they are really um teaching metaphysical, spiritual concepts through this show in a way that is interesting, and there's like the thriller aspect of it, and it's you know, we're really curious to see where it goes, how
Okay.
it turns out. So we did all 4 seasons because we just found it a month or two ago and just
Mhm.
watched it all straight through. So I found that interesting, mostly because I'm as I'm watching it, I'm waiting to see, are they going to be making fun of the sort of spiritual concepts here and call it woo woo, or is it going to go super religious, or is it going to be scientific? And what I've appreciated is there's a really nice blending, which is sort of the space I like to hold,
Right.
between the need for spirituality and the need for science and discernment. And so the characters go on a really interesting journey with that. The other one that I'm really enjoying right now is Wednesday. They just put Wednesday up, which is
Yes,
from
we haven't
the
started that yet, but yeah.
oh, it's so much fun to watch a young woman who is her most unique self, really feeling she's growing. I always like to have shows with character arcs, but at the same time she's unapologetic for who she is, and that is super fun. And yeah, so those are the things that I'm watching right now.
Maybe
It's
too.
fun. It's fun. I mean, there are other things, like I'm in the middle of the documentary series on Meghan and Harry, and that
Mhm.
also is incredibly important. This same, always the things that interest me are these tensions, right, between what do individuals need and what does an institution need, and how we get into dysfunction because we ignore the needs on either end of those spectrums, and the courage that it takes for these two people to define themselves in a new way in the midst of everything. It's
Right.
inspiring.
Yeah, people are redefining themselves all over the place, right? And I'm
It's
glad that
fine.
more and more people are realizing that they are, in fact, spiritual beings having a human experience, not the other way around. Okay. And finally, what song would be the theme song to the soundtrack of your life?
Well, it's always going to be Gloria Gaynor's "I Will Survive."
Yes. Yes. Yes, that's perfect. That's perfect. What a great thing. I'm sure it's the theme song of something, right?
Yeah, I don't know, but
Maybe a repertoire, I don't know.
I adore that
I'll
song.
have to go Google that. Um, yeah, oh, those are all really fabulous answers. Well, thank you again. And I'm glad that you went with it, right? Instead of me reading the scripted podcast questions that you've had to answer 1,000 times
Oh my
over.
God, no, can I just say how much fun this has been to not have to do that? In fact, it's time for me to like change out those. I should have realized, oh my God, like halfway through the cycle, oh, let me send out some new questions because this is a
Right.
bull rings.
Well, and I realized that, I mean, the book just came out last year, right?
Actually, it came out in 2021, so
Yeah,
March
last
of
year.
21.
Today,
Yeah,
today,
oh, that's right. We're still
2022.
in 2022.
Yeah. So anyway, I realized that most of the time you talk about your book, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about your book, but I also didn't want to pretend that I've already read it when I haven't, right? Because we're all authentic here,
Yeah,
right?
no worries. It's fine.
And like I said, hopefully we'll have you on the show again.
Yeah.
All right, Rima, I'll be in touch. You have a fabulous day, and may the peace of the goddess be with you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And to you
Okay.
too. All
All
right.
right. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching or listening. If you want more of The Girlfriend God, you can find The Girlfriend God and The Girlfriend God podcast on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. The Girlfriend